Last year, we ranked every Sony franchise from worst to best. We decided soon afterwards to rank every Microsoft franchise, but they didn't really have any, so let's do Nintendo instead.
Now, Nintendo did not make this task easy for us. In addition to the sheer volume of franchises they have to sift through, it's not always clear which games belong in which series. For instance, the first Wario Land game was released as a Mario Land game, and the first Yoshi game, yes, I say Yoshi, not Yoshi, and I'm going to be saying it for this entire video, deal with it, was released as a Mario World sequel. What's more, the game called Yoshi is pretty clearly not part of the Yoshi series. Then you have things like Metroid 2, which got what could be considered either a remake or a completely different game based on the same story. It's so confusing.
Also, in our Sony list, we were able to rely almost exclusively on Metacritic averages, but Nintendo's history is much longer than that site's existence. We will still be getting our ratings from Metacritic where possible, but in a few cases we turned to our friends at Nintendo Life for their averages. Where both Metacritic and Nintendo Life didn't work, we turned to GameFAQs, and where all three of those failed us, we turned to places we'd rather not discuss.
Our ground rules are quite similar to those in our Sony list. We are defining a Nintendo franchise as a series developed by one of the company's first or second party studios. We're only counting series that have 3 or more games, and ports, remakes, collections, and re-releases don't count. We're only looking at the first release for each game on a Nintendo console.
In addition, we aren't going to include arcade games. If those games were ported to consoles, however, we will consider those ports in our calculations. We also won't count dedicated handheld games such as the Game & Watch series. Same goes for Satellaview games, as those can't be played and reviewed properly anymore. Let's rank them. I'm Ben.
And I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and here is every Nintendo franchise ranked from worst to best.
Number 69. Strong start. Mario Discovery Series, 43.4%. Didn't expect to see Mario at the very bottom of this list, did you? I don't know, maybe you did. I have no particular insight into the way your mind works. Perhaps I'd be more insightful though if I'd grown up playing the Mario Discovery series. Probably not though, because look at this crap. We wish we didn't have to bring these things up. The series did originate on PC, but Nintendo saw it fit to publish ports for its home consoles as well. So here we are, as tax-paying adults playing Mario is Missing and Mario's Time Machine and wishing God would let us die. The series also includes 3 games under the Mario's Early Years banner. Fun with Letters, Fun with Numbers, and Preschool Fun. That's 3 games with fun in the title, and yet there's no fun to be had. Perhaps that's why the series is no more. Nintendo didn't want to get sued for false advertising. Number 68. Donkey Kong, 51.6%. The first Donkey Kong arcade game may have established Nintendo as a serious contender in the video game industry, but by the time it and its sequels made their way to the NES, the world had moved on. Scores for the NES game only went as high as 53% for Donkey Kong and sunk as low as 25% for Donkey Kong Jr. Math, which we're only counting here because YouTube's algorithms will give us a bump if enough of you start arguing in the comments about whether or not we should have considered that a spin-off. The highest rated game is Donkey Kong for the Game Boy with 90%. That game ultimately gave rise to the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, and we were tempted to include it there instead. Had we done that though, the average score for this series would have been 42%, dropping it into last place. And hasn't the stupid ape suffered enough? Number 67. Balloon Fight, 52.33%. Of the original black box NES games, Balloon Fight was among the best. Granted, that's similar to choosing the best time you slammed your fingers in a car door, but still. In the main game, you pop the balloons of baddies before they can pop yours. There's also Balloon Trip Mode, in which you navigate an obstacle course to see how far you can get. The Game Boy sequel, Balloon Kid, attempted to fit the series into firmly recognizable Nintendo territory. It was a side-scroller that tried to marry Balloon Fight's mechanics to more or less standard platforming levels. and it was awful. We did eventually get a third game, and by that I mean Nintendo took Balloon Fight and put Tingle in it. It was, by quite a wide margin, the highest scoring game in the series, and I can't wait for Nintendo to finally release Mike Tingle's Punch-Out! Number 66. Pokémon Rumble, 55.5%. I have to admit, I was a bit surprised to see this many big names end up so far down the list. In the case of Pokémon Rumble though, it's fairly well deserved. After all, the idea behind the series seemed to be, what if we took everything people love about Pokémon and then didn't do that? Simplicity has worked to the benefit of many Nintendo series, but stripping the Pokémon experience this far down has yet to win over critics. None of the Pokémon Rumble games have even hit 60% on Metacritic. I suppose nobody was impressed by their core gameplay loop of pressing some buttons, turning the game off, and wishing you were dead. Most Pokémon spin-offs bring at least something interesting to the table, but Pokémon Rumble is like Pokémon for people who don't like Pokémon. And if that's the case, why bother? Number 65. Famicom Grand Prix, 62.33%. Look, it's that racing series from Nintendo that isn't the one you're thinking of. These Japan-only games form a kind of franchise, we think. It's hard to tell. The first game was titled F1 Race, which was also the subtitle of the second game, Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race. The third game dropped the F1 Race but retained Famicom Grand Prix with the subtitle 3D Hot Rally, which is also my name on racingsingles.com. See you there. F1 Race was a tough-as-nails race into the distance. Famicom Grand Prix took a bird's-eye view of the action, and 3D Hot Rally went back to the racing into the distance model, but this time with music. Which was the best approach? Famicom Grand Prix scored the highest with 64%, and 3D Hot Rally scored the lowest with 61%, so it's not like any of them performed particularly well in the eyes of critics. Fortunately though, this was far from the last time Nintendo would hit the road. Number 64. Fossil Fighters, 65%. Fossil Fighters was never much of a critical darling. It peaked with a 70% average for its first game, but it attracted a number of devoted fans. Players roamed around, digging up fossils and summoning dinosaurs for combat. Its sequel, Fossil Fighters Champions, did little to push the series forward though, but it pleased fans well enough and averaged a similar 68%. Its dismal and so far final 3DS outing, Fossil Fighters Frontier, is what seals its place so low on this list. It averaged 57% among critics, and a good number of fans are likely to argue that even that is too generous. It felt like a series that suddenly didn't understand why anybody liked it, and I suppose that worked out because people indeed stopped liking it. One could even say it stinks. Please save your applause for the end of the video. Number 63. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, 66.6%. For years, Nintendo and Sega were at each other's metaphorical throats. Meanwhile, gamers were at each other's literal throats. The console wars of the early 1990s saw children everywhere pledging their undying support to either a plumber with a mustache or a hedgehog without a mustache. The clash was brutal, with around 80% of the world's population being killed. Anyway, then the two companies became friends. What's more, the mascots of history's most antagonistic video game companies were teaming up for an all-new series of games. The imagination ran wild. Sonic's speed, Mario's whimsy, the possibilities were endless. It was a minigame collection. Yes, the series built around the industry's least likely team-up was a set of licensed Olympic tie-ins. It's not what anyone was expecting, nor what anyone wanted, and its position on this list shows exactly how thrilled critics were to finally see Eggman curling. Number 62. Dr. Mario, 66.83%. Nintendo's answer to Tetris was putting Mario in a lab coat and making him play Puyo Puyo. Okay, it's not exactly like Puyo Puyo, but it certainly has more in common with that series than anyone should have been comfortable with. Nintendo's upbeat puzzle game about the joys of mixing medications was a hit. Review-wise though, it never averaged more than 72% with the WiiWare version, which certainly benefited from being one of the 2 games on the Wii with online functionality that worked. When paired with another series for Dr. Mario/Puzzle League, it fared a bit better, averaging 74%. So should we put Dr. Mario/Puzzle League here, or in the Puzzle League entry? We did both, because no matter what we did, we'd upset somebody. We decided therefore, it was only fair to upset everybody. Number 61. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, 67.1%. Spike Chunsoft's Mystery Dungeon games have crossed over with different IPs a number of times. Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, and Twin Bee, for instance, 3 of the greatest and most influential RPGs in gaming history. That third one was a joke, by the way. We make those sometimes, make yourself comfortable. It's even crossed over with Pokémon, which won't surprise you because I've already said it in the name of this entry. Perhaps strangely, the best received Pokémon Mystery Dungeon games are the trio of Japan-exclusive WiiWare titles with scores ranging from 75 to 77%. The worldwide releases fared quite a bit worse, with Gates to Infinity earning the lowest score of 59%. The Switch did just recently get a remade version of the first 2 games, so the series isn't dead yet. Remember that. It will really annoy you when you see what much better series are never coming back. Number 60. DILLON'S Rolling Western, 67.33%. Does anybody out there like DILLON'S Rolling Western? If you do, go to bed without supper because you are lying to us. Nintendo doesn't even seem to care about it, dumping 3 games onto the eShop and hoping nobody would notice. The first game earned a 65% average on Metacritic, but the next 2 games fared a bit better, with DILLON'S Dead Heat Breakers scoring a series high of 69%. The games did get better as they went on, but only because they couldn't get worse without giving players leprosy. We'll never see Dillon again, we promise, though we may disappoint whomever maintains his fan wiki. It contains such valuable information as this: Dillon's name may be a combination of the last 2 syllables of armadillo, his species, as well as the common name Dillon. You heard it here first, the name Dillon may be a reference to the name Dillon. Citation probably not needed. Number 59. Chibi-Robo, 68%. Chibi-Robo was an unexpected fan favourite for the GameCube. Its following wasn't huge, and with a Metacritic average of 75%, its critical reception wasn't all that impressive, but it slowly gained an appreciative fan base who enjoyed the quirky, household adventures of a brave little robot. What was Nintendo to do now that it had a beloved new character? That's right, destroy it. The next game, Park Patrol, was released as a Walmart exclusive in North America. Perhaps because that game still managed to reach too many fans, the third game remained Japan exclusive. Nintendo then squashed fan enthusiasm for good. They released Photo Finder, an innovative game for the 3DS that didn't work. Of course, surely the next Chibi-Robo game would be good, to which Nintendo answered Ziplash, and nobody ever mentioned the series again. Number 58. Pokémon Ranger, 68.33%. Pokémon Ranger is a Pokémon game with a difference, and that difference is that nobody liked it. Okay, well, some people did like it, but none of the 3 games in the series cracked 70% on Metacritic. In fact, they all scored either 68% or 69%, so at least they're consistently disappointing. One welcome feature was compatibility with proper Pokémon games such as Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver. One less welcome feature was that it was not a proper Pokémon game itself, relying on the stylus gimmickry that marred so many other games on the DS. If we're going to give them a touchscreen, Nintendo must have said, we might as well make them hate it. The odds of us getting another Pokémon Ranger are quite slim. If you listen closely, you might hear somebody, somewhere, lament the death of this series. You might, but you definitely won't. Number 57. Mario Party, 69%. Yes. Mario Party's placement so far down this list isn't evidence that the series is bad, it's more that it's uneven. Average scores range from a very fair 80% all the way down to 54%. Of course, scores are bound to fluctuate when comparing minigame collections. Some titles will simply have better minigames. With Mario Party though, much of the criticism comes from the overall experience. Later titles reduced the number of boards, simplified the non-minigame activities, almost entirely eliminated the strategy element, and introduced random events that all but declared a new winner on the spot. It shouldn't be difficult to make a good Mario Party game, and on the whole, Nintendo's franchises benefit from experimentation. In this case though, the series seems to keep pulling away from the reasons anyone enjoyed it in the first place. As Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, "Party's over." He said that, right? He must have, sounds like something he'd say. Number 56. Donkey Konga, 70.33%. Do you don't want to work? Do you just want to bang on de drum all day? Then, brother, is Donkey Konga for you. Donkey Konga seemed to be Nintendo's answer to titles such as Guitar Hero with a reliance on popular songs. Which makes sense, but part of the appeal of Guitar Hero was, the guitar. You could live your dream of playing the solos and riffs of your favourite tunes. Is it as exciting to slap along to the music of Smash Mouth? The answer, of course, is entirely down to your opinion, but the answer is also no. The games didn't benefit from being built around a clunky peripheral. Just one look at the DK bongos made it quite clear they'd be gathering dust before long. It's not like you could use these things to control, say, a platformer. Oh my god! Number 55. Art Academy, 70.63%. Art Academy was a series of releases aimed at developing artistic skill. How successful the titles were at this is debatable, with overall scores for the games ranging from 40 to 82%. But the impulse is a good one, especially since a number of Nintendo's consoles had touchscreens. Drawing and painting programs were a good fit. The series even had some crossover appeal, with releases centered on Pokémon and Disney properties. It probably wasn't a series many children were begging for, but it would at least have given them a creative outlet. Could it produce anything as impressive as this, though? I don't think so. It's possible we'll see another release in the series. The Switch seems like a perfect home for it, but we don't think too many people will miss it if it skips a generation. Or the rest of the generations. Number 54. Brain Age, 70.75%. It's probably not a good sign that Brain Age barely gets a passing grade. The series, also known as Brain Training, is designed to stimulate your mind and improve your intelligence. A noble goal, but not an especially fun one. It's like a minigame collection, but instead of enjoying yourself, you solve for X. There's no real evidence that Brain Age or anything like it has a true impact on one's capacity for thinking real good, but it certainly can't hurt. What's more, it fills an important niche by appealing to people who bought a Nintendo console but would rather not play games on it. Critics didn't seem to enjoy it much, however. Insert your own joke about the mental capacity of game critics here. The first two games scored a decent 77%, but it was downhill from there, with the latest game, Brain Training for Nintendo Switch, receiving a paltry 60%. Number 53. HAMTARO, 70.87%. In 1982, Nintendo released a licensed Popeye game for arcades. It was a success, but it wouldn't be long before Nintendo built an impressive roster of original characters, meaning that they would never have to rely on the whims of licensing ever again. They could sell their games on the strengths of their own ideas rather than relying on anyone else's. Except for HAMTARO. Mario, Yoshi, Link, they're nice and all, but do any of them hold a candle to HAMTARO? Could they even hope to? HAMTARO is a hamster who... well, he's a hamster anyway. Or she. It's a hamster. It's called HAMTARO. It's cute and it slots easily into minigames. What else do you want from me? The games themselves range hugely in quality. Question Castle in the Clouds holds a 50% average, while Totoko Hamtaro Tomodachi Daisakusen Deku holds an 83% average, presumably because saying the game's title out loud teaches you Japanese. I feel stupider!
Number 52, YAKUMAN, 71%. It's one of Nintendo's longest running series, but you probably don't know much about YAKUMAN. That's because there isn't all that much to know about YAKUMAN. It's a series of mahjong games, with little of the Nintendo flair we often find when they adapt existing concepts. That's because there's already a market for mahjong games in Japan. There's no need to rely on zany gimmicks to turn it into something it's not. Mahjong sells as it is, and Nintendo gives fans exactly what they want. The first game in the series was released for the Game Boy, with sequels following on the Famicom, Game Boy Advance, DS, Wii, the 3DS and the Wii U. We wouldn't be all that surprised if the Switch gets a version as well, to be honest. After all, YAKUMAN can't be that difficult to develop, and Mahjong fans, or Yaku maniacs, which we will all start calling them now, surely can't wait for more. Number 51, LABO, 71.25%. LABO is more than just cardboard. It's cardboard that will sit in the corner mocking you for the money you spent on it. But the cardboard also comes with games, which means they got reviewed and included in this list. Of the kits released so far, and we say so far in order to send chills down your spine, the Variety kit has fared the best with an average of 77%. It was released alongside the Robot kit, which could only be used to create one thing and play one game. I admit that's not much of an observation, but look at what we're working with here, we need to pad this entry out somehow. Strangely though, LABO also represented Nintendo's most recent foray into virtual reality. With the LABO VR kit, you could press your Switch directly into your eyeballs. The number of games that take advantage of this functionality though is hovering near zero, which frankly we think is for the best. Number 50, Custom Robo, 73%. Custom Robo is a franchise that didn't leave Japan until its fourth game. There was only one game to come after that, and Custom Robo was then no more. In other words, Westerners got just enough of a taste of the series to then miss it when it was gone. The two games that did come westward actually ended up being the worst scoring ones, with Custom Robo for the GameCube earning a 65% average, and Custom Robo Arena earning 74%. The latter score is much more in line though with the first three games in the series, all of which scored either 75 or 76%. It was never one of Nintendo's biggest critical success stories, but the chance to smash up robots alone or with friends earned it a devoted and ultimately disappointed following. But don't lose hope, Nintendo could well release Custom Robo Ziplash any day now. Maybe they'll just come up with a better name in the meantime. Number 49, Pilot Wings, 73.67%. Pilot Wings serves every so often as a retail tech demo for Nintendo's consoles. Each of its three entries was a launch title, with the SNES game showing off Mode 7 technology, the N64 game showing off 3D environments, and the 3DS game showing off the system's impressive depth of field. Beyond that though, the games tend to not have much staying power, which seems to be reflected in their modest critical appraisals. The averages range from 70 to 80%, not bad of course, but also nothing worth crowing about. For those who stick with the games, there is satisfaction to be gained from mastering the various vehicles and gadgets, and they all have excellent soundtracks to keep you company in the lonely skies. It's just that Nintendo doesn't seem keen on developing the idea into a more fully fleshed out experience, and that's a shame. There's a great formula here, but as of now, a formula is all that it is. Number 48, Mario Tennis, 74.86%. One of only two series on this list with an entry on the Virtual Boy, which we mentioned because we ranked all of that system's games in a previous video and we need your sympathy, Mario Tennis hasn't quite had the impact as most of Nintendo's other sports titles. The games have power-ups and silly courts and this guy, but overall it's basically tennis. If you enjoy the sport, you can have a good time, but if you don't, these games won't win you over. The series has a wide range of scores, from 91% for Mario Tennis on the N64, all the way down to 58% for Mario Tennis Ultra Smash on the Wii U. We'll almost certainly be seeing Mario Tennis games for generations to come, even if the novelty, what small novelty there actually was, has long worn off. Number 47, Yoshi, 75%. I'm not going to say it right and you can't make me. Best known as the creature you're willing to sacrifice so that Mario can jump a bit higher, Yoshi has starred in a good number of games since his introduction in Super Mario World. We're only counting his platformers here, sorry first-person shooter fans, but we'll still end up with some wildly varying scores, let me assure you. The first proper Yoshi game, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island for the SNES, is often cited as one of the best platformers ever made, and Nintendo Life awarded it a rare 100%. After that, however, the series never hit 80%, with Yoshi's Woolly World and Yoshi's Crafted World coming closest at 78 and 79% respectively. Massively disappointing was the attempted return to form with Yoshi's New Island. A few people would have expected another perfect score, but its eventual average of 64% is downright embarrassing. Number 46, Excite, 75.4%. Oh look, it's that other racing series from Nintendo that isn't the one you're thinking of. We could have limited this franchise to the 3 games with Excite Bike in their titles, but Nintendo's decision to name 2 other games, Excite Truck and Excite Bots, make the intended association rather clear. It's all the same franchise. Excite Bike 64 fared best in a critical sense, with a Metacritic average of 88%. The lowest average, 70%, goes to both the original Excite Bike and Excite Bike World Rally. It may be true that the first game has not aged especially well, but it was an important early title for Nintendo, showing us what to expect from their sports games to come. That is, simplicity. And we say that as a compliment, to be clear. Nintendo wanted a simple, easy to understand game, and tried several times to turn it into a larger series. The problem was that by the time the second game came around, Nintendo had a bigger and better racing franchise on its shelves, which you'll have to stay tuned for, won't you? Number 45. Art Style, 75.58%. Art Style was a strange series. It hails from Nintendo's earliest dabblings with WiiWare and DSiWare. Remember the DSi? It was like the DS, but it was the same thing. Of the art style games, Box Life scored 80%, turning the simple act of cutting and folding boxes into a frantic nightmare. Orbient scored 82% and is one of the simplest games in the series, as you manipulate a planet's orbit to avoid larger bodies and absorb smaller ones. The highest scoring game though was called either Pico-Pict or Pictobit, depending on where you lived and how serious you want to get about this. It hit 83%, even though it was a fairly uninspired puzzle game. That may be because it featured sprites from Nintendo history and remixes of their music, so of course it was the one in the series everybody bought. Not that we can blame them, most of the other art style games made their theoretical charms difficult to understand. You might as well go with something that at least looks familiar, and that's what everyone did, apparently. Number 44. POKÉMON Stadium, 75.67%. POKÉMON Stadium is held in decent regard, both critically and here at Triple Jump, and until the Switch came along, it was the closest thing home consoles had to a quote-unquote proper POKÉMON experience. The reason this series is so far down the list though, is its Japanese exclusive first entry, Pocket Monsters Stadium. It earned a score of 69%, which is both nice and also exceedingly generous, considering the game feels unfinished. Fewer than 1/3 of the first generation Pokemon even feature here. The proper Pokemon Stadium, the second game that is, fared much better. It even had a selection of fun mini-games, making it something you could play with friends, even if they didn't care about Pokemon. Sorry, I couldn't keep a straight face there. If they didn't care about Pokemon, they obviously weren't your friend, were they? This game and its sequel refined the rough formula of Pocket Monsters Stadium and earned notably improved averages of 80% and 78%. Fun as they were though, we are glad to now live in an era where actual Pokemon games are on consoles as an alternative. Number 43. Kid Icarus, 76%. We think Kid Icarus is brilliant. Wait, what? Oh, sorry, not that one. What were we talking about? Oh, this thing. Yeah, Kid Icarus. Yeah, that's better described as an oddity. It was one of Nintendo's original platformers for the NES. It made the jump to the Game Boy, as nearly every other franchise did, and then nothing. It wasn't until the 3DS that Kid Icarus got a third game, and that's a gap of 21 years. The original Kid Icarus starred an angel exploring dungeons to find armor that would let him defeat Medusa. You know, the classic story of Icarus. It was brutally difficult, and you'd periodically turn into an aubergine. The sequel sanded off the rough edges, which was good, but sanded off the rough edges to the point that it no longer had much of a personality, which was bad. Uprising, however, was well received by critics and fans alike. It has a Metacritic average of 83%, with criticism directed at the game's control scheme, mainly. A direct sequel could solve that problem and give the world the phenomenal Kid Icarus game it's always wanted, but I suppose given its track record, we'll all have to wait until 2033 to find out. Number 42. Mario vs. Donkey Kong, 76.57%. The Game Boy Donkey Kong games sparked the idea for this series, but Mario vs Donkey Kong has an identity all of its own. The first game, Mario vs Donkey Kong, is a sort of bridge between the Game Boy game and the later titles. It also introduces the little clockwork dolls known as the Minis. As the series progressed, the Minis became the focus, having to be guided around and through the many obstacles of each level, like in Lemmings, or Krusty's Funhouse, if you prefer playing bad games. Fans may be pleased to know that this is the one series in which Pauline, the damsel in distress from the original Donkey Kong game, has a regular role, and various Mario characters have been represented by Minis over the years. The series is honestly not very memorable, but it is very well made, and you could do far worse when looking for a time killer. Number 41, WarioWare, 76.63%. Nintendo has no shortage of minigame collections, but starting with the Game Boy Advance, the company branched into micro games as well. True to their name, micro games were designed for those who thought that the main problem with minigames is that they were too long. So Nintendo fleshed out Wario's new series with colourful characters, great music, and a willingness to be very, very silly. And before long, WarioWare was being used to show off Nintendo's various control gimmicks, such as gyroscopic sensors, touchscreens, and of course, the Wii remote. These games tended to be well received, not least because none of the concepts stuck around long enough to wear out their welcome. All but 3 titles in the series have average scores between 80 and 90%, with the lowest rating coming from the camera-focused WarioWare Snapped with its dismal 53%. I guess making funny faces isn't a great way to control games. Who'd have thought it? Number 40, Bit Generations, 76.71%. Alright, sewers. We weren't sure how to treat this series in relation to art style. See, Bit Generations was a series of 7 abstract games released in Japan for the Game Boy Advance. So far, so simple. The issue, though, comes from the fact that some of these games were remade as art style titles, technically ports which we aren't considering for this list. However, only some of the Bit Generation games were released under the art style banner, all of which featured gameplay tweaks and all but one of which had a different name. Furthermore, both series had exclusive titles in addition to the overlapping ones, so despite the fact that it certainly would have been easier to just mash the whole lot into a single entry, it simply cannot be said that the art style franchise is just Bit Generations again trademarked. You see what we meant now about Nintendo making this list very difficult for us? Regardless, Bit Generations is a strange series, and if you'd like to import a copy from Japan, don't worry, there's no language barrier, you'll just be baffled by everything else instead. Number 39, Style Savvy or Style Boutique, 76.75%. Style Savvy, released as Style Boutique in Europe, where people know how to spell and pronounce the word boutique, I guess, is a series of fashion games published by Nintendo for the DS and 3DS. We aren't all that familiar with these games, we admit, but that's mainly because we're the 2 most stylish human beings on the planet, so we think we'd have an unfair advantage playing these games. We are surprised to see the series this far up the list though. Their critical receptions imply that these might actually be quite good as far as dress-up games go. The original game on the DS averaged only 73%, but the trilogy of games that followed on the 3DS fared much better, with average scores ranging from 76 to 80%. So perhaps we'll play these games sometime, for a sleepover stream maybe, and then we can talk about fashion and do each other's hair and gossip about boys. Or perhaps I'll just finish recording this entry and immediately forget that these games ever existed. Who can say? Place your bets down below. Number 38, Wave Race, 77%. Oh look, it's yet another racing series from Nintendo that isn't the one you're thinking of. Just wait, be patient! The first Wave Race game saw a Western release, but no release in Japan. That's a real rarity on this list. Critically, it averaged a mere 59%. Nintendo was willing to give the series a shot on home consoles, however, and this time they would release it in Japan. The result was Wave Race 64, which was a massive improvement in every way. I mean, of course it was, just compare this to this. It also represented a huge step forward in terms of reception. earning an average score of 92%. The GameCube got the third and final game, Wave Race Blue Storm, with its impressive weather effects and water physics. It scored a little bit lower, but it showed that the series might be a fixture of Nintendo's upcoming consoles, showing off what they could do in a graphical sense. And then, needless to say, it was never heard from again. It's a shame. Number 37, Kirby, 77.11%. You may have expected this series to be a little higher. Without question, one of the most popular video game characters ever to be made entirely of candy floss, Kirby has been in a massive number of games. Based on our criteria, we're only considering 19 of them here. Yes, only 19. But he's in puzzle games, sports games, and well, that's it really. But he's been in a lot of both of those. Mainly, Kirby is known for his platformers, which might seem a bit odd as he can fly over everything. Kirby games aren't defined by their challenge though, but rather by adorable charm and colourful worlds, and by the fact that most of the games end with you breaking all kinds of endangered species laws and kicking the crap out of a penguin. The lack of challenge hasn't held back the critical praise. The supremely relaxing Kirby's Epic Yarn is the series high, with 86%. On the other end of the spectrum, Kirby Battle Royale, presumably a game in which you and 99 other Kirbys drop onto an island and kill each other, earned the series low of 57%. It's a saturated market, what do you expect? Number 36, WiiFit, 77.33%. Nintendo essentially created the gamer lifestyle in the 1980s. Then Microsoft recreated the gamer lifestyle to be more like this. However, always one to rise to a challenge, Nintendo set about getting everyone back into shape with the Wii Fit. And the strangest thing is, it actually worked. Well, it worked from a sales perspective, I mean. We have no way of knowing how many Wii owners became overnight Adonises, but demand for the game reportedly outpaced production several times over, leading to scalpers selling it for exorbitant sums on eBay. I think we can safely say that nobody expected such a rush for a fitness program that goes onto your video game console. God, I wonder how many people were killed in the stampede for Get Fit with Mel B. There were 2 games on the Wii and 1 on the Wii U, and that was it. But Nintendo isn't out of the fitness game yet. Ring Fit Adventure for the Switch is a clear successor, and could well become a series of its own.
Number 35, Game & Watch Gallery, 77.6%. I know we said we wouldn't include Game & Watch games, but surely by now you understand that our rules aren't really rules, they're just things we say to make you angry. Game & Watch Gallery consists of mainly compilations of Nintendo's old Game & Watch titles, which is an excellent way to relive the days during which games were not good. What elevates the series, though, are the modernised versions of the old concepts. They look better, they play better, and they sound... well, they actually have sound now and not just little computer sneezes. These remade versions are a bit more engaging than the originals, but your tolerance for them will still boil down to how much you care about beating your own high score. The Game & Watch titles are far from Nintendo's best, but it's impossible to ask for a better way of keeping them alive. Number 34, KURURIN, 77.67%, and yeah, I know I probably pronounced that incorrectly, I'm sorry. This may be history's least compelling box art, but it's at least pretty true to what KURURIN, oh god, has to offer. The game is about navigating a slowly spinning shaft through a series of mazes, and it's exactly the sort of game that looks easy unless you can hear the profanity spewing from the person recording the gameplay footage. Critics gave it an overall average of 80%. Its very similar sequel earned a very similar score of 78%. A much enhanced third game was released for the GameCube. It didn't fare as well, it earned an overall average of 75%, but it was much easier to control with that console's analog stick than with the GBA's D-pad. It's a shame the series didn't survive into the DS or Wii eras, when those unique control schemes could have made the games that much easier to play. Number 33, STARFOX, 78.25%. STARFOX makes it this far up the list entirely due to its strong debut. It was an important, fast-paced, action-packed game for Nintendo. The company would have been foolish not to turn it into a series. The company would have been even more foolish to turn it into a rubbish series, which is exactly what they ended up doing. StarFox Adventures was the last game to score above 80%, and it did so just barely. The next several games dipped into the low 60s. Years after the series crashed and burned, Nintendo made the previously unreleased Star Fox 2 available officially. This gave modern critics an uncommon chance to review a SNES-era game without being influenced by nostalgia. Would this prove that Nintendo had forgotten how to make Star Fox games, or would it prove that they were never that great to begin with? The game earned an 80% average and proved, yeah, Nintendo just stopped caring. Whoops. Number 32. Punch-Out! 79%. At first, it seemed as though Punch-Out would be one of Nintendo's tentpole releases. It followed them from the arcade to the NES to the SNES, and then that was it. Nintendo didn't seem to have much interest in keeping the series going beyond that. It did have a brief and excellent resurgence on the Wii, and now it's vanished once more. We're not quite sure why Punch-Out doesn't stick around. Perhaps it's something to do with the fact that each game features racial and cultural stereotypes who you punch repeatedly in the face. Punch-Out is a lot of fun though, reimagining boxing as a sort of reaction-based puzzle game. It's up to you to work out what to do and when within a limited moveset. It's a fairly brainy way to represent a sport that famously results in literal damage to the brain. Number 31. Daigasso Band Brothers, 81%. Daigasso Band Brothers is not the most famous rhythm series from Nintendo, we'll get there eventually, but it is the one that most directly connected to music. Throughout the games you'll play along with licensed songs, classical compositions, video game tracks, and so on. All of this works well enough, but the real draw was the ability to compose your own music. Even if you had no musical talent, you could use the DS's microphone to hum or sing your melody, which the game would then convert into notes. And that's quite cool. The series was almost entirely exclusive to Japan, with one of the 3 games reaching North America. The second game, retitled Jam with the Band, made it to Europe, but that's it. If you want to play any of these games, the odds are good you'll have to search for an import copy. Quick word of advice on that note, if you're googling Band Brothers, just be extra cautious of typos. Number 30. BOXBOY! 81%. BOXBOY is in capital letters and followed by an exclamation mark indicating that the title is meant to be read loudly and with great emphasis into the ear of your sleeping grandmother. BOXBOY! BOXBOY! The games are puzzle platformers, with the series so far spanning the 3DS and the Switch. That makes sense. BOXBOY isn't the sort of thing you're likely to play for long sessions, but it's a perfect fit for a handheld. Just don't let anyone see you playing a game in which a square poops out other squares and climbs around on them, because they may ask questions you will not be able to answer. The series has been remarkably consistent with its critical reception. The first 2 games averaged 80% on Metacritic, the third averaged 83%, and the fourth averaged 81%. They're good enough puzzlers with fair difficulty curves and some deceptively complicated levels, but there probably aren't many die-hard fans in BOXBOY's corner. Number 29. Mario Golf, 81.17%. We were a bit surprised to see Nintendo's golf games so high on the list, but the fact is that they really are among the best. We're counting NES Open Tournament Golf on our list, as it's Mario Golf in everything but name. That game established the basic mechanics of the series to follow, and overall, for every other golf game worth its salt. As the series has evolved, it's definitely grown more playful, with themed courses, unlockables, power-ups, and so on. At its core though, it remains a simple and relaxing experience that's perfect for playing whenever you get the urge to use the words stroke and birdo in the same sentence. Some of the games even include RPG elements, allowing you to guide an avatar through its own career. This mode teaches you the rules, the controls, and a number of solid strategies, making Mario Golf a decent way to learn the sport. Number 28. Panel de Pon, 81.2%. If you don't live in Japan, you may not recognize the name Panel de Pon. You may still know the series through one of its reskins, however. The franchise first came to the West with Tetris Attack, a Nintendo-fied reimagining of the first game. Replacing the game's fairy characters with those from Yoshi's Island diluted a lot of the charm of the original though. Also, the game plays nothing like Tetris, just to confuse things further. Afterwards, the series went by the name Puzzle League, plastered again with Nintendo characters to serve as POKÉMON spin-offs. It's obvious Nintendo doesn't know quite what to do with this series outside of Japan, as it keeps relabeling it and tying it into other franchises in the hopes that somebody will buy it. That's a shame, because Panel de Pon, while simple, is an addictive and memorable experience. Also, the soundtracks stand tall among Nintendo's best, and that is saying something. Number 27. Rhythm Heaven, 81.67%. Rhythm Tengoku, known in the West as Rhythm Heaven, is a difficult series of rhythm-based minigame collections that demand near-perfect timing despite their often cartoony, childlike presentations. Either that or we lack rhythm ourselves. But I think we know that isn't true. It's a simple series, but it requires a lot of focus, particularly when you're first adjusting. And as with any collection, not every minigame is all that much fun. Even fans will be quick to confess their hatred of one frustrating sequence or another. There are only 3 games in the series that fit our criteria, but they're rather consistent in their overall quality. Both Rhythm Heaven and Rhythm Heaven Fever have averages of 83%, with the original Rhythm Tengoku coming in only a few points below that at 79%. The series almost certainly has a future ahead of it, and we're surprised we don't already have a game for the Switch. Number 26. Nintendo Wars, 82.09%. Before it was conquered by another turn-based strategy series, Nintendo Wars scratched the Battlefield itch across several consoles. And, like that other fiery, emblematic series, quite a few of the games never left Japan. Of the ones that did, the Advance Wars games are the most well-known. Games were released for other systems, but by the time these hit the Game Boy Advance, the formula had been improved and refined to perfection, which is why so many gamers remember them fondly today. Critics agreed, as the Advance Wars titles scored between 89% and 92%, notably higher than both earlier and later iterations, which tended to hover around the mid-70s. Is there still a place for the Wars series in Nintendo's plans? Possibly not, but you never know. Nintendo Wars and Fire Emblem have completely different characters, tones, and settings. Then again, so do F-Zero and Super Mario Kart, and we all know how that's working out. Number 25. WarioLand, 82.13%. Wario getting his own series of platformers when Mario already had one might seem redundant, but there are a number of important differences that set him apart as a character. He's fat, he's greedy for coins, he's disrespectful to the local wildlife. Well, I assume there's a difference? Cooler mustache, maybe. Anyway, Wario's games do differ quite a bit. They're overtly tongue-in-cheek, and a number of them are structured more like puzzle platformers, in which it's impossible to die and the only challenge is finding your way forwards. They're both more experimental and less refined than Mario's 2D outings, which suits their protagonist well. It's anyone's guess as to when Wario will return to adventures of this kind, however. For a good while, both this series and WarioWare coexisted, and we haven't seen a Wario platformer since WarioLand Shake It for the Wii. A return is overdue. Sorry. Peter?
Number 24. Donkey Kong Country, 82.3%. When Donkey Kong Country arrived on shelves, it looked light years beyond anything else the SNES had given us. The level design and soundtrack were top-notch, and it's still considered one of the best platformers ever made. The 2 SNES sequels that followed were held in just about as high regard, which represents a phenomenal run for the trilogy as a whole. The lowest scoring game in that initial batch still averaged 87%, which is commendable. After that, however, the banana started to soften. Handheld outings did well enough, but Donkey Kong 64 brought down the average hard with its 70%. And frankly, we think even that is a bit too high. Fortunately, a pair of recent titles have confirmed that Donkey Kong's platforming adventures can be as strong as ever. Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze are both firm contenders for best in the series. What can we say? This monkey shines. That's going to be lost on so many people, I'm sorry. Number 23. PICROSS, 82.75%. Do you like Sudoku? Do you like looking at images with your eyes? If so, PICROSS combines both of your life's passions in one simple package. The series began on the Game Boy with Mario's PICROSS, which was really just regular PICROSS with a picture of Mario tossing you saucy winks every so often. I don't care, I'm all about it. Official magazine Nintendo Power dedicated pages not to just previewing the game, but also to teaching you how to play it. They even included puzzles puzzles for readers to solve on paper, but that reveals one drawback to PICROSS as a series. You really can play it just as easily with a pencil. Not something that can be said of Dr. Mario, for example. Either way, PICROSS is a fun series, and it's mainly made its home on Nintendo's handheld consoles where it fits best. It's made no major missteps, but it certainly hasn't done much worth remembering either. It's just very inoffensive. Number 22, Metroid, 82.8%. In 1986, Nintendo asked the world, what if we made Alien, but with more than 2 good ones? Metroid was thusly born. It was a game that birthed a genre that appeals primarily to those who enjoy walking back and forth through rooms until they accidentally do what is necessary to progress. The shining star of the series is Super Metroid, a game with secrets that are still being discovered today, and which Nintendo Life has blessed with a score of 100 out of 100. That's the highest possible score, obviously. Not far behind is Metro Fusion, which sits at an impressive 92%. With scores like that, you might think the series is being weighed down by the profoundly hated Wii entry Other M. In truth, though, it's weighed down by its first 2 titles, which scored 73% and 70%. Other M, by contrast, missed out on an 80% average by a single point. I don't know, critics must just really like watching Samus wet herself. Number 21, Paper Mario, 82.83%. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars is frequently cited as one of the best role-playing games ever made. Fans waited patiently for a sequel that never came, but Nintendo did give the world a worthy successor with Paper Mario, a humorous RPG adventure with an incredible visual design that guaranteed it would become a mainstay for the publisher. Only that didn't quite happen. Paper Mario is this high on the list due to the stellar reception of its first game, which sits at a mighty 93% on Metacritic. The scores haven't gotten anywhere near that since, though. The era of gimmickry hasn't helped, with the RPG mechanics being dropped to sorely diminishing returns. The lowest ranking game in the series is Sticker Star with 75%, though Colour Splash is only 1 point higher. The Origami King proved to be no less gimmicky, but critics did give it an average of 81%. This is the stage of grief we call acceptance. Number 20, Mario Artist, 83%. Western Nintendo fans probably remember Mario Paint for the SNES. It was an art program / bug extermination simulator with an excellent soundtrack. During the Nintendo 64 DD era though, Japan got an entire series of programs built around learning fine arts from a plumber. Consisting of Paint Studio, Talent Studio, and Polygon Studio, this creativity suite was described by IGN as being the Nintendo 64 DD's killer app. Being as that device never left Japan though, very little killing was done in the name of Mario Artist. For the purposes of this list, we're not including the communication kit, which did little more than allowing the sharing of creations. Of the 3 that remain then, 2 of them scored 85%, with Talent Studio dragging down the average a bit with its score of 79%. This is one of Nintendo's strangest and least known franchises, which makes its placement just outside the top 20 all the more impressive. Number 19, New Super Mario Bros, 83%. Should we have lumped these games together with the other 2D Mario platformers? Maybe, but the more we thought about it, the more we felt that New Super Mario Bros. Really does stand out on its own. The games have unique enemy designs, power-ups, and level gimmicks, among other things that give this series a clear and deliberate identity. Which might be odd, because the first title released for the DS was an effort to return Mario to his roots. The fact that this effort became an entire series unto itself is proof of just how much of an appetite there was for back-to-basics Nintendo magic. The scores range from 77% to 89%. They're not the most exceptional games Mario and his pals have ever starred in, far from it, but they represent a great modern spin on a formula that made so many people fall in love with games in the first place. Number 18, Luigi's Mansion, 83.33%. Nintendo's elaborate apology to Luigi for sticking him into Mario is Missing is slowly turning into one of the company's staple releases. Each game sees Luigi in a haunted mansion, or a haunted series of other buildings, or a haunted hotel. Okay, so literally half of the name of the series is misleading, but you get the idea. Armed with a variety of gadgets by terrifying man-baby Professor E. Gadd, it's up to Luigi to clear out these ghosts once and for all. Or, until the next console launches, anyway. The first game sits at an unremarkable 78% on Metacritic, but its reputation has grown in the years since, with many seeing it as a gem in the GameCube's library. The other sequels on the 3DS and Switch hit 86%, but that doesn't exactly mean they're better. It more likely means that critics just finally came around to the spooky charms of the series. And who can blame them? Look at this. Number 17, Fire Emblem, 83.4%. Nintendo had no faith in Fire Emblem succeeding outside of Japan. Perhaps they felt Western audiences wouldn't have the patience or intelligence necessary to appreciate the series, and yeah, fair enough. After Super Smash Bros. Melee introduced Marth and Roy to new audiences though, and despite the fact that they had nothing to do with most Fire Emblem games, the company decided to give it a shot. Since then, Fire Emblem has become a popular and critical success around the world. Nintendo has even remade a few of the earlier titles in the series to take advantage of this massively expanded group of fans. It's largely those early titles that drag down the franchise average though. Fire Emblem Gaiden, the second game in the series, holds a 73% score. Similar scores came a few titles later for Genealogy of the Holy War, with an average of 74%. However, nearly every other game settled somewhere between 80 and 89%, except for series highlight Fire Emblem Awakening, which hit 92%. Well done. Number 16, Pikmin, 83.75%. Debuting on the GameCube and featuring terminology I'm about to butcher, Pikmin sees Lilliputian spaceman Olimar waddling around a mysterious planet to gather the necessary parts to fix his rocket. How did I do there? Let me know. Also, he's running out of oxygen and will soon asphyxiate, leaving his family to spend the rest of their lives wondering why Daddy left them and never came back. Those are some high stakes. Olimar, I really hope I'm saying that right, and others in later games can command little vegetable boys or girls known as Pikmin to perform tasks for them, but if you don't guide them back to safety before nightfall, they all die. It's fun. The main games were loved by fans and critics alike, with scores between 87 and 90%. Then came Hey Pikmin, which hurt the overall average with its rather dismal but nice 69%. We debated considering this game a spin-off actually, but decided that if Chibi-Robo's weird experiments should qualify, this one should too, I'm afraid. It's a shame, because had we not counted it, the Pikmin series would rocket into the number 5 position. Oh, you really let the side down, Hey Pikmin. Number 15, F-Zero, 84.33%. Oh look, it's that racing series from Nintendo that might be the one you're thinking of, but Nintendo certainly isn't. F-Zero was a high-speed futuristic racer that was no more realistic than Nintendo's other racing games, but its lack of weapons, high skill ceiling, and risk versus reward dilemma regarding opportunities to repair your vehicle made it an immediate hit. The first 4 games in the series all scored between 85 and 90%, quite impressive averages. The other 2 didn't do much worse, with 77 and 79%. However, aside from Smash Bros featuring Captain Falcon Kick, that is his full name, we've seen his driver's license, the company isn't all that interested in keeping F-Zero alive as a series. The final game was released in 2004 for the Game Boy Advance, with the hugely appropriate subtitle Climax. I mean, it's appropriate because that's where the series ended, with the climax, not because it made me. Number 14, the legendary Starfy, 84.6%. With Kirby keeping the peace in the sugary sweet skies and Yoshi keeping the peace on the sugary sweet land, it's up to Starfy to keep the peace in the sugary sweet sea. Not just any Starfy though, that's the legendary Starfy. Known as Densetsu no Starfy in Japan, definitely another mispronunciation, this is yet again a series that has just barely seen the light of a Western release. The 5th game was Starfy's global debut, which is unfortunate as it's the lowest scoring one in the franchise, perhaps convincing Nintendo that it just wasn't worth localizing any more of them. It's a bit strange that Nintendo hasn't pushed the series harder though, as Starfy has much in common with its more successful franchises. An adorable mascot, great music, simple gameplay. For whatever reason though, Nintendo has left it behind. How far behind? Oh, I don't know, about 20,000 leagues? I'll get my coat.
Number 13. Mario and Luigi, 84.6%. Coming in much higher than that other RPG series starring Mario, possibly because these games are still recognizable as RPGs, it's the Mario and Luigi series. The defining feature of these games is the ability to control both brothers at once, whether in combat or while exploring. The series began with Superstar Saga on the Game Boy Advance, where its lovely, cartoony style and surprisingly strong sense of humor earned it commercial and critical success. It currently sits at a well-deserved 90% on Metacritic. From there, the series has of course varied in its reception, sinking to a series low of 76% for Paper Jam on the 3DS. Much of the criticism today is that the games feel increasingly formulaic, but a ranking of number 13 is nothing to be ashamed of. Maybe being formulaic is okay when it's a formula this good. Number 12. Mo. 84.75%. Well, what else were we supposed to call this series? Each of the games changed the overall name somewhat. Pushmo, Crashmo, Stretchmo, at least in America. Europe got Pull Blocks, Fall Blocks, and Full Blocks, which doesn't make things any easier. We won't even begin to attempt the Japanese names. The series revolves around manipulating various sculptures, turning their features into platforms so that they can be climbed and the goal can be reached. Each title gives you different ways to interact with the pieces, but they play similarly enough that they are all recognizably part of the same series. The puzzle editors and shareable creations are also a very nice touch. There's no sign of it yet on the Switch, but we doubt Nintendo has lost interest. Yes, I have a feeling we will see Mo games. Pause for laughter. Number 11. Xenoblade, 84.75%. Operation Rainfall was a fan initiative during the Wii era that wanted three things: Pandora's Tower, The Last Story, and Xenoblade Chronicles. These were Japan-exclusive titles that, at the time, were not planned for any kind of Western release. Shockingly, the movement was successful, and all three games came westward. Only Xenoblade Chronicles ended up having a real impact though, and it became a surprisingly high-profile RPG series for Nintendo. The first game was a critical success, earning a 92% average on Metacritic. Ideally, subsequent games would have refined and expanded upon that strong foundation, but the average has decreased for each game since. 84% for Xenoblade Chronicles X, 83% for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and 80% for Torna the Golden Country. Even with this downward trajectory though, it just barely missed out on being one of the 10 highest rated Nintendo franchises ever, and that's definitely a success story. Number 10. Animal Crossing, 84.8%. Nintendo's Yard Work Simulator is without question one of the most relaxing and warm experiences a gamer can have. Beginning life in Japan as Animal Forest, the Western release on the GameCube won the series many passionate fans. It's difficult to describe the appeal of Animal Crossing. Tell somebody what you did during your last play session and it will sound like you were trying to set a world record for wasted time. Once the games click with you though, you'll feel their pull and be won over by their simple charm. Also, Tom Nook gets a bad rap, okay? I know everybody likes to tell their jokes about what a greedy little arse he is, but if you ever had a mortgage, you'll appreciate just how good you have it with his no background check, 0% interest, pay whenever you like approach. You ungrateful cur! Number 9. POKÉMON, 84.96%. It's a well-known fact that Nintendo spent many years trying to develop a cockfighting game for its handhelds so that fans worldwide could take all the fun and excitement of that blood sport on the go. Alas, they never quite cracked the formula and turned their attention to Pokémon instead. It was an instant smash. Trading cards, toys, manga, anime, sellotape dispensers, these little guys were everywhere and much loved. Even those who didn't play the games had a favourite pocket monster. For instance, the guy who wrote this script says here that his favourite was Jigglypuff. But that's utterly idiotic, as clearly the best Pokemon is Scyther. Do not talk to me about Jinx. Oh my god! The series was so popular that it warranted not only multiple releases each generation, but upgraded follow-ups. We can't think of many franchises that could get away with that, unless The Last of Us Part 2 leads to Let's Go Joel and Let's Go Ellie, as I have been petitioning Naughty Dog relentlessly. Number 8. Golden Sun, 85.33%. As you'll soon see, Golden Sun isn't the only beloved series this far up the list to be canned after just 3 games. In fact, it's not even the only RPG this far up the list to be canned after just 3 games. Golden Sun was released in 2001 for the Game Boy Advance. It holds a 91% average on Metacritic and often pops up on lists of the best games ever, full stop. This and its sequel look and sound fantastic. The stories are engaging and the mood is surprisingly mature. It seems like a franchise Nintendo would do well to nurture, so of course, it didn't. 2010 saw the release of Golden Sun Dark Dawn, a late-game third entry in the series for the DS. It scored decently, 79% on Metacritic, but failed to sell well, which is likely why we haven't seen anything since.
Number 7. Metroid Prime, 85.6%. When the N64 and original PlayStation started making 3D gaming the standard, a number of popular series experimented excitedly with the new possibilities. Except for Metroid, which sat out the entire generation, weirdly. The wait proved to be worth it, however, as Metroid Prime for the GameCube didn't just represent a transition into 3D, oh no, it's often touted as one of the best games ever, holding an incredible 97% average on Metacritic. That's even more incredible when you realise that outside of this series, there are precious few notable examples of first-person Metroidvanias. Though the sequels failed to live up to the high success of the first outing, Metroid Prime 2 still hit 92% and Metroid Prime 3 hit 90%. Even the DS game Metroid Prime Hunters got 85%. So what could possibly be dragging the average down? You already know, we don't want to talk about it and you can't make us. Moving on. Number 6, Super Mario Kart, 86.5%. At long last, it's that racing series from Nintendo, the one that gave the world the kart racing genre. The company hit upon a gold mine with Super Mario Kart, one of the all-time great multiplayer franchises. Much ink has been spilled. Okay, never mind. Much ink has been spilled regarding these series' reliance on luck over skill, but that's sort of the point. You don't need to win every time you play a game, you big crybabies, and it also means anyone can sit down and play for the first time and have a chance of beating their friends. The critical response to these games may come as a bit of a surprise though. The lowest ranked game is actually Mario Kart Wii with 82%, though we reckon anyone who owned a Wii put enough hours into this game online to question its ranking at the very bottom. So what's the highest rated? Mario Kart Super Circuit for the Game Boy Advance with 93%, would you believe? This is the highest rated Mario Kart right here. Yep, this is the best one, apparently. This is why I don't trust game critics. Number 5. The Super Mario 2D platformers, 87.14%. With Super Mario Bros., Nintendo codified the conventions that all other great platformers would follow, and which rendered previous platformers obsolete. The physics, the level design, the enemy types, the music, the game single-handedly represented the dawn of a new era, and even set standards that I'm sure influenced the 3D platformer genre eventually. Then the sequels absolutely lived up to and built upon its promises. Super Mario Land for the Game Boy ranked the lowest with a 70% from Nintendo Life. All the other games in the series though scored 80% or higher, with 2 titles earning 100%, they being Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World. The games have aged incredibly well too, and are still fun to rediscover today. What did surprise us though was that this particular series ended in 1992 with Super Mario Land 2 6 golden coins. That's right, if you count New Super Mario Bros. Separately, this was the last game in Mario's 2D platforming series. I wonder if they're ever likely to return in the form that we knew them. Number 4. EarthBound / Mother, 88.67%. If anyone can explain to us why Nintendo prefers to let its fourth most critically acclaimed series languish completely, we would love to hear from you. Brilliantly colourful, masterfully constructed, and wonderfully weird, the Mother series represents the company at its most fun, most inventive, and most intelligent. To this day, Westerners haven't even had an official release of the third game. Mother 2 came to the SNES as EarthBound, but didn't see a proper re-release until the Wii U's Virtual Console. A localised version of the first Mother game followed, now called EarthBound Beginnings. Leave it to Nintendo to stick two of its most in-demand titles on their one console nobody wanted. There's no reason the series can't continue, but perhaps Nintendo are afraid they can't produce anything that will live up to the previous game's legacies. Then again, these are the guys who released Metroid Prime Federation Force, so that's probably not their concern. Number 3. Super Smash Bros. 89%. Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64 was a humble first outing, but all of the ingredients were there. And frankly, if anyone wanted to see Pikachu kick the living tar out of Donkey Kong, this game was obviously your only option. From there though, the series grew into a celebration of Nintendo history, and it's only branched out further since, with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate including enough non-Nintendo characters that it became a celebration of video games in general. In fact, Ultimate has a roster so large, we think it probably even includes characters nobody's even created yet. There's just too many to check. While the first game scored an OK 79%, Super Smash Bros. Melee hit 92%, and that's actually the lowest score of any of the sequels, barring the 3DS version, which still pulled in a respectable 85. The Smash Bros. Series provides evidence for two things we already kind of knew. Firstly, that few other companies in gaming have a history as long as Nintendo's, and secondly, that no other company knows how to have this much fun with it. Number 2. The Legend of Zelda, 89.89%. True to its name, there are few series more legendary than this one. What's more, Zelda continues to provide the highlights for just about every console generation. Ocarina of Time even stands as the highest rated game ever on Metacritic, with a 99% average. Each of the major games feels like a response to what came before. Zelda 2 expanded on the world of the first game and experimented with new mechanics. Majora's Mask took the years-long story of Ocarina of Time and reimagined it as a cyclical 3-day nightmare. Twilight Princess responded to the sunny, colourful approach of The Wind Waker by sulking in the corner until we paid attention to it. And most recently, Breath of the Wild looked at Skyward Sword and then allowed us to forget that Skyward Sword ever existed. Any studio would be eternally proud if they developed The Legend of Zelda and would consider it their crowning achievement, guaranteeing them a place in gaming history. By continuing to bring out incredible sequels though, Nintendo has gone even beyond that.
Number 1. Super Mario 3D Platformers, 94.29%. Nintendo has done an excellent job of making sure Mario's core games are nothing short of incredible, with his 3D outings being among the absolute best games ever. This is all the more impressive when you realise just how many other franchises, Castlevania, Sonic, our beloved Bubsy, failed to make a lasting or effective jump to 3D at all.
Not one of the 3D Mario games has earned less than a 90% average, and that relative low point was Super Mario 3D Land, which in all fairness is still a very good game. An incredible 3 games are tied at the top with 97% averages: Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Galaxy 2, and the recent Switch masterpiece, Super Mario Odyssey.
We do realise that a number of you will disagree with our decision to split the 2D Mario games from the 3D Mario games. We went back and forth on that ourselves, but rest assured that even if we hadn't, Mario's platforming adventures would have ranked number 1. The race with Zelda would have been much tighter, Mario wins by less than 1 percentage point in that case, but the overall result is the same. Mario has absolutely earned his place at the very top.
And that is every Nintendo franchise ranked from worst to best. Ranked by other people, remember? We're just ordering them by overall average, so be sure to direct all of your disagreements at them. But seriously, where do you think the critics got it wrong? Do you think that Donkey Kong got done dirty? Would you personally place, I don't know, Balloon Fight at number 12? Did you expect to see Mario at the top? Of course you did. These questions are all rhetorical.
You can follow Triple Jump on Twitter here, and while you're at it, why not support the things you enjoy by having a look at our Patreon? Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ben.
And I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and thanks for watching.